Todd McIntosh, the Emmy-winning makeup artist on Buffy, said the following, quote, "Why do I recommend this book? The answer to that question is hard to express simply, because this is not a simple story. I worked in the film industry as a makeup artist for 42 years, mostly in Hollywood, with shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer in my credits. From childhood, I have loved books of mystery and horror. My first such books were Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, and later I fell under the spell of vampire fiction and movies. So right away, this book looked like my cup of tea. But being a fan of genre, you often read everything you can find on your subject, and soon, like an addict, it becomes harder to be captivated by a story. Only the Dead Know Burbank is a book that can pierce all dull and expected storylines and make you its prisoner from the outset. This is a book of many themes layered together, and it is hard to untangle yourself from its mostly grim outlook and squalid corners that appall and appease you in turns. The story is laced with nostalgia, loneliness, helplessness, abandonment, and raw ambition. The poison of revenge-fueled desire for achievement without compassion or empathy. And that is horror. For myself, scanning the horizon as age and the weight of time in the industry clearly silhouetted the end of my career, there were themes in this book that rang as loudly as my arthritic joints. The innocence of immigrants coming to America hoping to enter that circus of excitement which was the beginning of the film business, the world's shiny new toy. The subsequent search for the right job or situation, always just missed or negligently stumbled over. Offers of greatness snatched away before you even realize how you have been used by others. The realization that although you are an undead immortal, that fact does not bestow upon you success or even better opportunities than your co-travelers. And of course the shadow side, the vampiric nature of Hollywood itself, sucking life essence and offering only fleeting highs in return. All this reverberated for me, not to the true fan of TV and movies that I still am, but to the experienced man familiar with the dark face of Hollywood. After I read Mr. Tatum's book, I sent him a message saying that I had read part of the book on the very stage at Universal that housed the then still standing set from Lon Chaney's Phantom of the Opera. This backdrop made the story seem as if I were in it. So I recommend this book because very few books return to my mind and stay floating there somewhere and refuse to leave. And sometimes I wonder if it's time for me to take up residence in a cabinet under the sink. End quote.
Re-Vamped with Juliet Landau is sharing the love. This is a new section for Watch a Dev where I ask one or other of the cast, crew, or creators about a film, TV show, book, or another piece of art that they want to share with our audience. Today's book was chosen by Buffy makeup artist Todd McIntosh. It's called Only the Dead Know Burbank by Bradford Tatum. I read the book as well and really loved it. We are excited and honored to have the author of the book here with us today. Bradford began his career as an actor, appearing in numerous television shows and movies, such as 20th Century Fox's submarine comedy Down Periscope, Disney's Powder, and HBO's Westworld. He was a staff writer for Dick Wolf on the NBC series Deadline and has written and directed 2 award-winning independent features. He's won an Alfred P. Sloan grant for his written work, as well as sold pitches to various production companies. I'm so honored and excited to have you here today. Bradford, we were saying, I feel that you are one of us. You're a monster kid. Would you say that's true?
I would, but in a very homeopathic way, because I was a very kind of introverted, brainy kid who was actually quite terrified of this stuff until I read Poe. And then somehow I got my hands on the short stories of M.R. James. And it was like, oh, an antiquarian and demons. And oh, look how he writes. And oh, and these are Christmas stories for the boys. I think it was Cambridge or Oxford. It just was a way in that really appealed to me because growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was Friday the 13th and slashers and Phantasm and movies I just could not sit through. I was just way, 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 way too terrified. So when the creature features started to happen and I started to see more Val Lewton produced movies or the James Whale films or the Hollywood Horror Cycle from Universal, these movies had shadow and depth and emotion and pathos. And I was aware of the German Expressionist movement in Bauhaus and all that shit. So I could make the connection of the chiaroscuro lighting and all of that. And I just thought, oh, this is the horror that I like because it's more, it lurks, it creeps. It's not about shock. I just felt such a kindred feeling. The Frankenstein's monster, he's the pinup boy of the misunderstood. That was my way in. And I was a sculptor, so I was making little monsters and stuff, and I still make sufubis and little monsters and stuff. And so it all just sort of worked. But I didn't start out as a horror writer. I just wanted to be like Thomas Berger or something. And then this story just came to me.
Can you give a synopsis of Only the Dead Know Burbank?
Oh, God, I wish I had the book. I'd read the blurb. It's the story of a young girl named Maddie who's born in the latter part of the 19th century, and she has a fascination for cameras. And through a strange sort of consequence of her birth and who her mother is, she ends up leaving her small German town of Ulm and starting this strange journey as an artist model for the artist Egon Schiele. And while she's there, Egon Schiele, who famously died on Halloween, Maddie contracts the Spanish flu and is dying. And her mother says, oh, no, you don't understand. You don't have to die because basically her mother is a witch and works this sort of very crude and almost grotesque spell on her. And so Maddie becomes living dead like her mother. But her fascination with film and what was just on the cusp of the silent film golden era of Ufa and Murnau and Nosferatu and the Golem and all of these marvelous German expressionist films, she finds herself in that world. And that leads to a contract with Universal where she becomes basically the Universal Monsters Muse, where she befriends Billy Pratt, who's better known as Boris Karloff, and she becomes good friends with Lon Chaney. Then Lon Chaney Jr., Creighton, his son. This sounds a little Zelig-like. You have to understand that all of these films were done under the same studio umbrella. So it's actually, very believable that she would be this young, pale, dead girl that doesn't eat, isn't actually alive, but is having to pretend to be alive, but really understands the heart of horror in a very visceral way that she's able to communicate to these directors and these stars. Hence, the reason you have such amazing emotional performances in that golden age Hollywood cycle. That's basically the premise of it. Like, what's the truth behind the Universal horror cycle? Who really inspired it? And it's this little dead girl. That's the premise.
Where did you grow up, Bradford?
I grew up in Orange County, California, in what was then a very sleepy beach town called Newport Beach. And people are going to hear that and think, oh, God, no. We were very broke. It was just a kind of a surf town. In fact, when I saw Jaws in 1975 at 10 years old, we saw it at the Port Theater, which was literally 3 blocks from the beach. So we had seen this absolutely groundbreaking film, I remember, and you could smell the salt air. And so it was a community like that. It was California, Southern California, but it wasn't Hollywood. You know what I mean? But it was still very much a Californian upbringing. And then Northern California as well. So I kind of split my time between both sections of the state.
How did you get into acting?
I stuttered horribly. And I stuttered so bad that when I had to do a book report or had to do anything in public, this is going back several years, I'm still in the single digits. My English teacher said, look, I think you might want to see a speech therapist. And so I went to see the speech therapist and she gave me, I think it was the Gettysburg Address to read, and I didn't stutter. And she says, you don't have like a cerebral issue. You don't have some morphological problem. You have a confidence problem. Have you thought of doing drama? And I hadn't, because I was very bookish and very arty and very, Mr. Making Little Clay Monster Kid. And I said, oh, okay, I'll try it. It's 1976. We're doing a thing called Uncle Sam's Time Machine. And I kind of got cast as Benjamin Franklin. And I'm, 10 years old. And one of the caveats of doing the play was that I'd write my own dialogue. And I loved it. and I didn't stutter, and I got written up in the Orange County Register, and it was just this sort of a light broke, and I realized that, this might be a path forward for me. But it wasn't my first love. Writing was. But I thought somehow it got into my strange little brain that it would be far easier to be an actor and make a living doing that than a published author. Like, that to me was insurmountable. But, I'll go to acting school, and I'll go to New York City, and I'll study with Sanford Meisner, and I'll put in my chops, and it worked. But there was always this longing to write and to be in print. And I was writing all this time. And then it just kind of got to the point where I just had to start doing it. And so, only the Dead Know Burbank was actually self-published under another title called The Monster's Muse. And everybody had told me, if you self-publish, you will never get commercially published. It just won't happen. And so I spent 6 years of my life, probably the bleakest, darkest years, cold querying every single literary agent I could find online. And I was used to being rejected as an actor, and I was even kind of used to being rejected as a television writer. But when it was the triple threat of, you'd wake up and there were like 30 rejection slips online from all of these potential agents, it really, really just put me in this horribly dark state. And I loved this book, and I wanted it to reach a wider audience. I remember it was October 18th, years ago. This is probably 2015. I was sitting in my backyard, and this voice came into my head, and it said 10 more. And I said, I'm sorry. It was like Howard Beale and Network. It was like, what do you mean? I can't hear you. And it was like, query 10 more agents. And I was like, you don't understand. This is like swallowing fish hooks. This is so horrible. I don't want to do it. I'm feeling horrible. I'm feeling rejected. 10 more. It's adamant. So I, that second, got up, went to my computer, queried 10 more. And sure enough, within a week, Curtis Brown called me up and said, listen, we want to read a full manuscript and this, that, and the other thing. And before I knew it, I had an agent, and we were reworking the book very, very slightly because it was in pretty good shape. And we got to an impasse. It's where the character leaves Germany for Hollywood. And I wanted it to go one way, and my agent wanted it to go another way. And he said, well, I got this friend, Eric Meyer, works at HarperCollins Perennial, kind of owes me a favor. Let's have him read it, and then what he decides we'll do. No pretense. That was it. It was just to get this guy's opinion, and then we would change it, and then we would release it. Well, Eric Myers loved it because, bizarrely, he loved Hollywood horror. He loved old cycle Hollywood horror, and he thought that fictional genre was underserved. So he bought the book. So from getting nothing for years, all of a sudden I had an agent, and within 3 months I had the book sold, which is this marvelous false positive about how it was actually my career was going to go. But I've never been more excited in my life. And, when my daughter was born, I was, and it was a high like I never got as an actor, even on huge sets and working with known people and all of that. I was always interested in the screenwriters, who, as you know, are famously the lowest people on the totem pole. But that's where I'd be spending my lunches and my breaks. Because when I did Down Periscope, the director was David S. Ward, who had written The Sting.
Oh my God.
So I'm like, David, that's a brilliant film. I loved that as a kid. So I would just grill him on, how did you get that idea? And these confidence games, where'd you do the research? And so I was learning how to be kind of a writer from people that I, was working with, that I really, really respected. And I had a lot of weird little things like that happen.
Where did the idea of the book come from?
Oh God, this is a strange story. Two things specifically. The first one is the woman in the gold mask that you saw. That's my wife, Stacey Haiduk, who's a pretty well-known actress in Superboy and Sequest. And this is probably 1994, 1995. I'm living in Venice, and Venice is fairly far away from Burbank. And it's a drive over the hill, which if you were an actor in those days, that's the dreaded drive over the hill. You never want to do it. And my agent keeps calling me and said, this show Sequest, produced by Spielberg, they want to see you for this guest spot. It's this environmental terrorist because it's a futuristic submarine show. And I said, this just sounds so stupid. It's a fake dolphin. It's dumb. It's like, I really don't want to do this thing. And he kept calling and he kept calling and he kept calling. And finally, after rejecting, in my mind, preserving my sanity by not having to drive over the hill to Universal Studios, my agent calls up and says, look, they want to offer you the role. I said, but I never read for it. They said, they don't care. They want to offer you the role, but they want to meet you. So I said, fine, I'll drive over the hill. And so I drove over the hill and I met this guy, and I wasn't interested in the role, but I was very interested in the headshot of one of the young actresses on that wall. This beautiful woman with these piercing blue eyes. And I thought, okay, I'll do it. Well, that show shot on stage 28. Stage 28 was the original Phantom of the Opera set. 1925, Lon Chaney, Raoul produced, directed silent film. So imagine your first day on the shoot, drive over the hill, you go into stage 28, there's this magnificent futuristic submarine in the Paris Opera House. That's what it was. It was absolutely astounding. So I wasn't interested in the futuristic stuff. I was like, well, look at this horsehair and plaster and rotting velvet, amazing, ornate, Belle Epoque opera house. Why is this still here? What was it? Oh, it's a 1925 Phantom of the Opera, Lon Chaney, And I'm like, well, why is it still here? And they're like, well, every time we attempt to remove it, something happens to one of the workers. And there's weird knocking late at night, and there's weird whispers. And I thought, this is ridiculous. This can't be true. And these grips, old timers, were like, we just decided to leave it up. So I hold on to that, 1995, and I think, God, wouldn't it be a fascinating thing if a character inhabited stage 28, some ghost girl or something? And I just logged it away. Years later, we get married. I have my daughter, Sophia. So my wife gets a job doing All My Children in New York City. My daughter's probably 5. She's 25 now, so she's about 5 years old. Freezing, frigid, misty, very New England day in Central Park. And the park is covered with all of these earth mounds. And I don't know what the hell it is because I'm from the West Coast. So I had no idea what this was. And my daughter's like, Daddy, what are those mounds of dirt? And I just, out of the top of my head, I said, those are the graves of the vampire children of Central Park, honey. She goes, really? I said, yes. And there's one very special young vampire girl named Sophia Lacrimosa, hence the dedication for the book, who inhabits the streets of Central Park late at night. She rises from her grave, and she was getting all goosebumpy and giddly. And I thought, oh, this is fun. And then we got an ice cream and looked at the penguins in Central Park. And I thought, God, that's not a bad idea. Vampire kids in Central Park. Only I don't know anything about New York history. Oh, but I know something about Hollywood history. How about the vampire children of Griffith Park? I thought, that sounds terrible. Well, wait a minute. What about stage 28? Remember that? And I just started to slowly put this story together with this character and this girl. And then when I realized that Carl Laemmle, who ran Universal Studios, was from a small German town called Ulm, on the edge of the Black Forest, I said, that's where this girl's going to be from. And she's going to have the influences of the German witches from the Black Forest because it's right adjacent. And he started in studios. And so he would have been in the silent, and it all just started to move. And so I researched for 4 years the, Weimar and Ufa and all of the great silent film directors of Germany and what it would take to get, from Germany to Los Angeles. And I incorporated the Otto Dix paintings with all the German soldiers coming back disfigured. And so all of these pieces just started to fall together. But it took years and years and years. It was like driving down a very, very dark road with very minimal headlights. And I'd see a little bit of it at a time. What was amazing about it, though, is that everything I read about, because I lived in Los Angeles and I lived in Studio City, which is adjacent to Burbank, I could see all these locations. I could go there. What was it like in the 20s? What was it like? You know what I mean? And so it really got my imagination going. And I just wrote it and wrote it and wrote it, like the wave. And then I just slowly started to write the book.
Talk about your love of the Universal monsters.
First of all, this whole thing, like when you take a movie like Weapons and you're talking about Zach Krieger, and it's so amazing that he's incorporating humor with horror. And I'm like, excuse me, James Whale did that in 1931, and then it did even better in 1935. And Invisible Man is pretty funny. So no slight to Mr. Weapons, because that's a great film. However, this relationship between humor and horror is basically as old as the old silent horror shorts are. There was always humor in them. I mean, even in Thomas Edison's 1910 version of Frankenstein, it's so ridiculous that I'm sure audience had to have laughed at it. And that was of interest to me, that it wasn't about, destroying the audience or shocking the audience. It was about kind of creating this warm, comfortable creep. And I loved the lighting, and I loved, the Waxman scores. And then there's Jack Pierce, who in my estimation is the greatest makeup artist that ever lived. Dexter Chaney, who might even be, better, but Chaney was dead by 31. So just the craft and how realistic and how almost everything Pierce touched makeup-wise became iconic. Just absolutely go-to canon. And it just warmed my heart, and I'm love old things, and I live in a house from 1927, the year the movies learned to talk, and I just love the old, like I have a 1931 Majestic radio that I've plugged up to my iPod, and I can play the old, Inner Sanctum radio dramas, and I'm just into that stuff. I just love that amber-colored, rainy afternoon in Los Angeles, Oregon, hit world. And that Universal horror cycle, to me, was just never matched.
I'd agree, especially the first run. Was it Hellman who directed Dracula's Daughter? I really like Dracula's Daughter, a very underrated movie.
It is.
And by the way, one of the things that we found out is Juliet's co-star in Buffy's character name is Spike, but his real name is William Pratt, which is the same as Boris Karloff.
Yeah.
Maddie Ulm is such an amazing character. Her journey is both inspiring and very painful. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, because that's every young actor's journey in Hollywood. The thing when I created Maddie Ulm, and this is actually nonsense, I didn't create her. She was there, and I know this sounds insane. Like, I don't start a novel until I have a first sentence, and I also don't start writing until the character's in the room with me. And I know that sounds crazy and wacko, but Maddie Ulm, with her little legs dangling over this 1850 chair I have across my writing desk, she was sitting there watching me, telling me this story. And the idea was, how do I create a character that no matter how incredibly talented this young girl is, who presents as a 10-year-old, there's absolutely no way Hollywood would ever accept her behind the camera. And I thought, well, she has to be a child. A woman? Yes, because there's, Mabel Normand, and you had 1 out of 10 women had production deals in the 20s in Hollywood. So a woman director was not as bizarre as it is today, But then children were so, you didn't even have the labor laws fully in place yet. So the idea that she would be completely not taken seriously, that would create instant tension in her drive. And then giving her history with her mother and the character that we learned to be her father and the ghost and the haunting and all this other thing, it really started to drive the story. In fact, there's a segment of the book that is pretty controversial. And even at the time of its publishing, my editor said, look, I love it, but I think certain audience members are going to be very off-put by the fact that you tell this part. And I said, look, you cannot tell a Hollywood story without this element about how children are preyed upon in this town. It's very real. I know it makes people uncomfortable, but that's the truth of Hollywood. That's what it actually is. And I experienced it to a degree. My wife absolutely experienced it in the 80s. And I thought, and I remember even having this weird kind of argument with Maddie across the room, as bizarre as this sounds. And she's like, you have to put that in. And I kept saying, why? It's going to be divisive and make the women uncomfortable, and no one wants to read about this. She says, because that's what happened. That's the truth of what happened to me. That's real. So maybe I'm accessing some deep part of my own psychology or whatever, but I really felt compelled to tell the story exactly the way it was being told to me. Because why is it in first person? Like, why didn't I choose, third person omniscient? No, it had to be her perspective. It's kind of a possession. And maybe it's because as an actor, you inhabit a character. I was trained like that, studying with Meisner, working with really great people, having done it for so long. It's this idea that you're actually putting on the circumstantial suit that you're trying to tell, and you're fitting it bespoke to you. And that's just what happened, and she was so adamant about it.
You know what's actually very interesting about you saying that? My wife and I worked with Anne Rice a number of times, and Anne would say, Lestat would like that jacket.
That's my point. Yes.
Lestat wouldn't like that. That's not
Yes.
for the. And she said that he talked to her all the time. He was with her all the time. All her characters live with her. One of the things that is so touching about Maddie is that she achieves so much with so much disadvantage. You are right. She's 10 years old, but she actually achieves these monumental things. And the hard part as a creative person is watching her be so frustrated. Maybe now in 2025, she's doing something else. She's having fun online, making her films her way because she probably can now because she doesn't need a system. That to me was really brave and inspiring and very original. You don't let us off the hook. There is no fake ending.
No.
Yeah.
No. Here's the thing. I don't like movies about victims. I don't like books about victims. And I don't know if it's just my affinity for Joseph Campbell, but I believe the only stories we're telling are the stories about people that are heroic, who are not defined by their circumstances, but in spite of their circumstances. That who they are is not what they are, but what they choose to be. And so as difficult as her journey is, it had to remain heroic. It had to remain that she, even though it might seem like she's giving up, that final summation of where she's at the end of the book, there's a little tiny glimpse of hope through that weird closet that she's still in the game in her mind. In spite of all the fact that she got zero credit for anything she ever did, she's still in it. And those are the stories I think that are worth telling.
Can you talk about character of Mutter?
Oh.
Where did that come from for you, that character?
Mutter came from the idea of loving another one of Carl Laemmle's films. In fact, the film that Carl Laemmle wanted to promote and not Dracula, which was All Quiet on the Western Front. And it was so Mutter is a German soldier who's an enormous, probably Southern German plowboy, like a very handsome but very big and muscular guy who literally had a English shell peel off the top of his skull, and a metal plate has been sort of crudely riveted to the top of his skull, and it's rendered him kind of slow, kind of like Lenny in Mice and Men. But he's a character that Maddie meets when she's kind of a street performer as soon as she, awakens to her dead state. And Mutter kind of takes Maddie under his wing. In fact, Mutter means his mother in German. Like, I don't even know what his real name would be. It's just that all the men in his platoon called him Mutter because he would always make sure that everybody was okay. They were fed and they had clean socks and everything. So when she goes to Hollywood, he comes with her. And Lon Chaney is there doing what he always did, sketching interesting faces. And it's Mutter's face that he begins to sketch, which becomes the template for James Wells' Frankenstein. That's really where he got the inspiration. So he was kind of the real mother figure that her actual mother, Tansy Fluke, isn't. And this wonderful, lovely guy that, because she's human and in Hollywood and has an ego, makes a horrible choice. And you have to read the book, but he is, I've had people write to me and they were like, I was reading your book on the plane from New York to LA, and that section of the book with Mutter, I was sobbing. I was crying so hard. The stewardess had to come over and say, are you okay, sir? He just came to me so clearly because that's kind of what Karloff is in Frankenstein. And I thought, where the hell did he pull that performance out of? It's not the Golem. There's really no precedent for what he's doing. Who did he talk to? How did he know how to play this creature with such incredible pathos and, threat? But at the same time, it's really his pathos that you feel. And I thought, that's Mutter. That's the inspiration. It's him.
There's so much I love about the book. Chaney is such an enormous figure in her life.
Oh, yeah.
And he looms large over. And in a way, I felt that was her best and almost purest relationship next to Mutter. He knows what she is. I mean, the moment
near
the end where he says, I need some of that, whatever that is you have. Like,
Tell me you're ever after. Yeah.
is that how you see Chaney to you? Is that how you see Chaney?
Chaney is in my estimation one of the most magnificent Hollywood creations that has ever lived. Not only is he a spectacular emotional storyteller and a phenomenal visualizer and makeup artist, he's easily one of the best stuntmen that ever lived. Like, he's right up there with Buster Keaton in my mind. Two of the greatest stuntmen that ever lived. And he knew what it was like coming up from nothing. His parents were deaf. He hit Hollywood with no money. And in those days, they used to put a chalkboard up in front of Universal Studios. And the chalkboard would say, looking for people who are of Chinese descent, looking for people who are of Indian descent. And he would go into his little weird makeup box and come back as those guys. And he started to do extra work, walk-ons, as everything you can imagine. And then slowly, the head of the studio realized this guy is absolutely incredible and absolutely amazing. So when he sees Mutter and he sees Maddie, he knows exactly who they are because they're scrappers and they have a love of film that he has. He doesn't like it, and he's not interested in the fame that it brings him. He will literally suffer for it. Like the penalty, where he's strapping his legs behind, he will suffer for it. And the truth is that he was all set to do Dracula. He was going to do it. And it was going to be his last film because he'd fallen out with Lemley and he had a big deal with Paramount. And he was like, this will be my swan song. And then he gets the lung cancer. You know what I mean? And so that whole thing where she and Chaney are working out what is Dracula, it might have actually happened with someone, maybe not her, but he was just rugged and he really didn't care about pretense in an age when so many people did. He just loved the work. And having met, his grandkids at Comic-Cons and stuff, I mean, I just felt that about him intuitively. And they were like, that's exactly what he was like. He just loved the movies and he loved what he did. And he loved being this man of 1,000 faces. And then he had that card that said, don't step in that spider. It might be Lon Chaney. That was real. He used to hand those out with a signature. I mean, he's just this amazing guy who was oddly kind of unsung. I mean, he's just not as, I don't know. And that was another reason to write the book. I just thought these heroes, they were just innovators. I mean, and they were not imitating anything. They were having to make it up as they went along. And I just loved that element.
We also talk about the other relationships. I mean, the other relationships in the book are with Browning. Browning's actually kind of close to her and close to her life experience because they both were like almost carny people, right?
Correct. That's why that's there. Absolutely. But like Whale, when you start to research Browning and you start to research James Whale, I mean, there's a very famous thing with Elsa Lanchester saying that, James Whale treated Boris like a truck driver, which is very, very different than what Condon says in Gods and Monsters. You know what I mean? And he gives no credit to Jack Pierce for making that makeup. He takes all of it in that film. And I thought that can't be right. And same with Browning. Browning was the human corpse. He used to bury himself in the sand as a boy and breathe through a straw to make money. And he loved freaks. And he was very kind of not necessarily Tim Burton-ish, but kind of more John Waters-ish was the feeling that I got when I was researching him. He was kind of like a John Waters prototype. And so he would recognize Maddie's talent, but I always felt that he was intimidated by it, especially when she gives him the reason why he should make Dracula, because he had never made a supernatural horror film before Dracula. All of his movies were about con men and carnies. So why all of a sudden did he decide to do something supernatural? And the reason for that's in the book. He was one of those guys who was like, do you love him? Do you hate him? You know what I mean? Because he is a bit of an opportunist and he is a very othered guy, but he's also brilliant. He also, I mean, Freaks is love it or hate it. There is nothing like that film ever made.
Ever. And that has ever been made since.
No. It's absolutely brilliant.
You draw them as such individual characters. Like the difference between Whale, who is kind of like the future in a weird way. Browning is like the past and Whale is the future. What did Whale mean to you? How did he speak to you?
Well, you're stuck with Whale because Whale is the guy who got the gig. He was not the guy that Universal was set upon. He was kind of the last minute decision. he had done that thing about the streetwalker and the soldier.
Waterloo Bridge.
Waterloo Bridge. And that really caught Carl Laemmle's eye. And he thought, okay, you can have your pick of anything. And what I liked about Whale was that he was very wry and he was very witty and he was obviously incredibly intelligent, but he would be a great foil for Maddie. He would challenge her. So the irony that he actually has the sketch that Egon Schiele did of her when she was dying, and she can't tell him that for the obvious reason, but that they are strangely connected in ways they don't even understand. And that Whale would take this little girl so creatively seriously because of the way she presents herself, and kind of knew, I really need this to be my film, but I can't make it without you. So I'm going to keep you in the dark. You know what I mean? And if he's treating Karloff the way that Elsa Lanchester says she's treating, where's Boris Karloff getting his idea? I mean, who's he bouncing it off of? It can't be James Whale because he's such a dick. You know, I mean, he's just so manic about, this is the movie that I need to make. And he was right. It completely exploded the genre. In fact, I think Bride is probably even a better film. But that Maddie isn't daunted by that.
One of the things that's also interesting in the book is there's a certain point which you don't really tell us her age, but the way she's starting to talk is telling us her age. Like, near the end, she's a very sophisticated woman who's trapped in this body.
Oh, God, yes. Very right. Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of an amazing choice because you don't sort of age her. Like, I think there's a bit where you say, time comes, time goes, because what is time to the undead?
Nothing. Nothing.
It's just something she goes through. Talk about her mother, because her mother's a really interesting.
Anita Berber, right? Like the ultimate. I mean, this is basically what Liza Minnelli is basing, Sally Bowles on. I mean, I know Christopher Isherwood saw her perform. Granted, that performer was English and Berber was German, but the fascination with a woman that is so immersed in her own sense of feminine identity that it almost squeezes out motherhood. Like there's no room for motherhood. It has to all be about her personal sexuality, her personal sense of power, and her personal sense of autonomy. And in doing that, she conditions Maddie to be as tough as she is. And in a weird way, she's the perfect mother for what Maddie's going to face. As painful as that is for Maddie, that she has a mother who's basically an artist model and a prostitute who just really did not care about her kid, but still wants to connect with her. It's this marvelous psychological and sociological training for this girl because she just abandons her. I mean, you have to read the book. I don't want to get too much away.
Also kind of loves life and she loves living her life. Yes. In a weird way, Maddie suffers what artists suffer from and her mother suffers from none of that.
None of it. Yeah.
Like there's no doubt.
None, because her mother has taken the opposite end of the equation that they're both undead. And so the mother isn't defined by the fact that she's the living dead, where Maddie is for a long time. In fact, that gives her the insight into horror. Tanzi lives as if her days are numberless because they are, and she can. And so there's that section of the book where she basically is teaching her kid, this is how you be creatures like us. This is how you do this. It doesn't have to be dark and depressing and dreary. It can be beautiful and it can be amazing. And I thought, oh, there's hope in that. Even though it's negative and even though it's horrible and even though she's neglectful and selfish and spiteful, she does have this bizarre joie de vivre. And so it reminded me a lot of like the MC in Cabaret, who's not a heroic character. I mean, when you hear Joel Grey talk about that character, he is the coming of the Nazi Party. He's not a good guy, but he's fun and he's full of life. And when you study Weimar, that's really what you see. These people that actually felt like they were the living dead. And this was the last era of Germany. How far can the Deutschmark fall? How bad can it get? And now you got these brown shirts on the corner screaming these bizarre epitaphs and we don't know what's going on. Screw it. Let's just have the most amazing time we can have. So it would be decadent. You know what I mean? Which kind of was an era that I lived through in the 80s in New York. Like I kind of knew what that was in a sense. So it just really, really appealed to me. That whole era, the whole 20s Germany with the Bobenkopf and Auf dem Streeck and the whole culture really, really, I find absolutely fascinating.
Well, also it defines Hollywood. I mean,
Yep.
these people who
Yep.
leave, how many of those artists and artisans came and just really gave us noir comes from there. You've got Fritz Lang, you've got all of these directors and artists, and it's just really being created there. And I think it's also interesting that she really comes from that. That is in her soul. One of the things I really enjoyed is I'm a big fan of that period as well. And, you know, you look at Nosferatu, you look at Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, like her films feel like they belong there.
Yeah, she actually does end up making two silent films absolutely based on what that aesthetic was. But I love that aesthetic. So it was just fun for me to invent what that would have been.
Maddie is a true visionary, right? An artist at heart. How much of her is in you?
100%. 100%. And it's strange because if you read my other novels, like the new one I just came out, Angie Baby, or, you know, Hot Berry Punch, which is kind of like a spiritual sequel to Only the Dead Know Burbank, they're all women. And maybe it's being raised by a single mom, but if you want to understand the challenges of living in society, you've got to have a female perspective because it is night and day. I mean, even my pets are female. I mean, my wife, my daughter, all our dogs are female. The idea of the male heroic journey pales in comparison to what women have to go through. It had to be that. I so identified as a young kid being raised by a single mom in an age where a divorced mother could not get a credit card. And the banker is saying, don't worry, honey, you're attractive. You'll marry again. And that's 1975. You know what I mean? And that's the struggle that I saw. I saw men getting away with murder, just getting away with anything, just getting forgiven everything, and then babied. And the women were busting their humps. And I guess it really, really imprinted on me as a kid that those stories need to be told from that perspective. So I heavily identify with it.
What do you hope people take from this book?
Hope that no matter how bleak and how impossible somebody says something is, do anything you can to be part of it. Do not collapse your identity or your sense of self in what happens to you, but who you are as it's happening. And that if you live life like that, there will always be hope because you don't need grit and you don't need tenacity and you don't need connections and you don't need any of the things that people think you need to make it in Hollywood or make it as an artist. You need hope. You need to be able to rekindle your belief in yourself when it's been stamped so deep into the earth and urinated on by everybody around you. And you're like, nope, there's a tiny spark still in there. And I'm going to blow on it and I'm going to get that back into a flame. And if you come away from this incredible journey that this kid goes on and think, wow, that's the artist's journey. And if she can do it, anybody can do it. Then that's why I wrote it. I mean, and my love with that era, but
Is there anything you'd like to share about the book and its creation that I haven't asked you?
it was just such an amazing time writing it. My wife and I would go on these long walks, and I always do this. I think about something for at least several years. It gestates, and then we would take these long walks, and this was right before I'd write it, and I would reflect back the things you're talking about because these were from two female perspectives. And so it was interesting to hear from a woman who'd been in Hollywood and struggled and achieved in Hollywood, you know, how does this feel? Does this set? Does this work? And she would just nod. She was just very silent. She never said right or wrong. I just felt supported and that the book was really an extension of my family in a weird way. I mean, there's something about Tanzi that's very much in my wife, although she's an extremely good mother, but my wife is filled with life like that character is. And even though there's a lot of me in Maddie, there's also a lot of my daughter Sophia in her because she was about, you know, around that age when I was writing it. And so I was heavily observing her and watching her. And the fact that there's a testament to this really fleeting moment of my family life in novel form that really only I know, I think is something that kind of gets me through kind of my darker periods where I feel like I haven't achieved enough. I can go, yeah, but you wrote that. You did that.
What are you working on now?
Well, I just had a book come out last month called Angie Baby from Horror Smith Publishing. It's available on Amazon. See, a lot of people get confused and think Maddie's a vampire. She's not. But MMA Shinecock in Hotberry Punch, which is a very American vampire story set in the antebellum frontier and another incredible journey, is a vampire. So those two things I'm still putting out and supporting. They're both available on Amazon. But my wife and kid are doing a feature film that I wrote called Brand New Cadillac that deals with very dark things and fun things. And it's kind of an interesting road picture that we're getting it made. We're just doing it. And if my wife was here, she's like, we're absolutely going to get this movie made. I mean, she's got that Tansy Fluke energy. She's like, this is going to happen. So that's been taking up a lot of time. And then I've been pushing the Sofubis, which are the soft vinyl figures that I make. And so it's just living life. It's just really, really, really living life, because these books take a while to get out there.
So we can get the book on Amazon. Do you have a website of your own where if they wanted to get a signed copy of the book, they can get?
What they would do if they want a signed copy, and like I said, I warned you about what a notorious Luddite I am. What they would do is they just basically go on my Instagram, Bradford Tatum 5, on Instagram, and you DM me, and you basically have Amazon purchase the book, but you send it to me, and then I'll just send it back to you free of charge. I mean, I'll happily sign anything at no cost. And so I would just give you my address, when you DM me. And then that's how it's been working for about 3 or 4 years.
Has anyone optioned the book yet?
I don't think enough people know it. That you contacted me was a miracle commensurate with loaves and fishes. Like, I had no idea that anybody was still reading it.
Well, you know what? Todd McIntosh is kind of the legendary makeup artist for the great run of the Buffy series. And my wife was on Buffy, and we're very close, and we recommend books to each other. And he said, you've got to read this book.
Well, wait a minute, because there is a review about a guy who was a makeup artist in Hollywood on Amazon. Is this guy?
Yes, Todd McIntosh.
Well, he doesn't give his name. Oh my God, I was so moved by what he said.
And he said, you've got to read this. And I read it, and we both are kind of obsessed with it. I really feel that you have a unique voice. It just feels like one of those movies that you would make as a series or a movie where technology is there now to actually create her in a real way.
That's a great point. Yeah, it would be marvelous.
Do you think there will ever be a sequel to this? Do you think you will ever revisit Maddie? Will she ever come back?
Well, again, I didn't know people cared.
I have so beyond enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.
I will. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.